Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. We are here to provide hope, resources, and a community so no one feels alone in their grief. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Power of Love show, sponsored by the D.D. Jackson Foundation, where we shine a light on loss and grief and how it impacts our lives. My name is T.J. Jackson, and with me is my eldest brother, Taj Jackson.
What's up, T?
What is going on, man? How are you?
Good. Just getting comfortable.
Getting comfortable. I like it. I like it a lot. So, as many of you know, maybe this is your first time, though, watching or listening. We are live right now on Facebook and YouTube. You could be listening to us via a podcast. Yes, each and every single show gets upstreamed, uploaded into the podcast universe, and becomes a podcast. So if you are a podcast listener, make sure to check out the D.D. Jackson Foundation. The Power of Love show is what the name of this show is called. And consider subscribing so you don't miss a show that way. If you are enjoying our podcast already, please consider leaving a review. It helps anyone who's looking for this type of content to find it. So, with all of that said, we have a disclaimer to read, and that is that we are not licensed therapists. We are just ordinary people who have experienced loss in our lives. We've been impacted by it, and we have learned from it. And what we like to do here on the Power of Love show is share our opinions and our experiences in an attempt to help you get through whatever it is you are going through. Saying that if you need professional help, we urge you to seek it and to find it. Please do not just rely on us. Now, another thing I should share is that I've mentioned D.D. Jackson Foundation, but I should also share the website in case you want to learn more about what we do specifically. You can go to www.ddjf.org, and you, of course, can donate to all of our programs that we have going on. But even if you just want to listen or I should say research or learn more about what we're doing, go check us out at www.ddjf.org. So Taj Jackson, this is show number 305. It's amazing how we've been up to 300 episodes. It's crazy. But I just wanted to A, say Happy New Year again, but B, check in with you and see what's going on in your week. How is your New Year's kicking off?
You know, I love New Year's because I always, hit the ground running in that way. But everything's going well. Just, the sleep hasn't gotten any better. I didn't expect it to, but that's kind of been the story of my life in that way. But I've come across a couple things in terms of just, I always have to remind myself about the gratitude aspect of everything in that way. There's a lot of self-improvement, self-help stuff, law of attraction stuff that I've been reading, but the gratitude thing is the thing that I naturally always feel grateful for things, but I like, it's important to say it and to think it and remind yourself in that way. So that's something I need to still work on in that way. I'm always grateful for things, but in terms of just, it's easy when you wake up and you see, you have 3 beautiful daughters in that way and a beautiful wife, and you're like, okay, this is the life in that way. So, but I told you I was going to make New Year's resolution. So it's not a New Year resolution, but including gratitude in my life is something that I want to do more of as well.
Taj, we of course always heard about the power of gratitude or the importance of gratitude, but it wasn't with I'm forgetting. Please
Dr.
help
Green.
me, Taj. Dr. Green. I don't know if she goes by Dr. Green.
I think we asked her and she didn't like that or something. Well, it was.
Yeah, so there you go, Taj. I don't know. Obviously, Maris mom, and I feel so bad. I'm blanking on her name again.
I think we still called her doctor, but yeah, I know what you mean. Should
have been. Beautiful soul, beautiful person who really impacted me. She out of all of our guests, she's definitely one that influenced my life because of the way she talked about gratitude. One of my favorite questions. Yeah, that was the first time I really got a good understanding of it. One of my favorite thing to do is to ask people from a prior generation, what would they advise? What do they wish they'd learned more, did more of when they were younger? And that was the one thing I remember her saying, or really saying, we need to do better on as a society. And I loved it. And I really committed to it. And I really felt a huge difference. So
Mhm.
um, I, I, I love that. And I don't ever think it's too late to practice it. But the truth of the matter is, if you're watching this or part of this show, we are so blessed and fortunate. And sometimes we forget that because of all the things in life that, what do they call it? Third world country problems that aren't, when you zoom out, is really just minor, mostly minor stuff. So I agree with you, Taj. I think gratitude is a huge component to a healthy lifestyle and a healthy life. So I appreciate you even mentioning it on today's show.
Yeah, it's. I'm always about learning and learning more. So yeah.
Love it. All right, so Taj, let's get into our show. Since we talked about gratitude, that's unless there's something else that was going on in the last week or so that is pressing you want to mention.
Not that I can remember. So
I didn't think
let's
so.
move on.
All right. Well, on today's episode of the Power of Love show, we welcome a very special guest to the program. Her name is Dr. Korie Leigh. Dr. Korie Leigh is a Santa Fe, New Mexico based published children's book author, a university professor, a child life specialist, and a grief counselor who has spent 20 years working with children and families experiencing grief and loss. As an associate professor and program director of the Thanatology program at Marian University, she teaches graduate courses on child development, death, dying, and bereavement. Dr. Leigh obtained her Ph.D in transpersonal psychology, where she wrote her dissertation on the lived experiences of bereaved parents. She also holds a master's degree in public health and grief counseling and a bachelor's degree in child development. Her first book, What Does Grief Feel Like, was released in 2023, and her second book is set to be released this winter, and it is written for grieving teens. Dr. Leigh serves on the board of directors for Heroes Path Paliative and provides psychosocial care to medically fragile children and their families. She speaks and presents at national and regional conferences on issues of grief, loss, and coping. Here today to share a bit more about her impactful work in the grief space. Without much further ado, please welcome to the stage Dr. Korie Leigh to the Power of Love show. Dr. Korie Leigh. Those are automated claps.
Yeah, I like it.
Anyway,
We just added
Doc,
those.
yeah, it's not too old. It's like 7, 8
Touch.
episodes, well, more than that. But okay, when I do the intros, some are easy, some are challenging. Please correct me on any words that I may have messed up.
No, you did a wonderful job. I like every time I hear the my own introduction, I'm like, oh dear, I need to like pare that down. On the other hand, I do so much
Mhm.
in so many different aspects of grief and loss, but they all intersect.
Mhm.
So that word that you mentioned, thanatology, it's always like it's an interesting question. It's an interesting conversation to bring up just in social settings too, where people ask me, what do I do? And when I'm feeling more verbal, more conversational, I'll say, well, what do you think thanatology is? And when you look at the word thanatology and you look at the root of it, thanatos or Thanos, and you think of like Guardians of the Galaxy,
Yeah, I was about to say it's
who
Marvel,
was
right?
who was Thanos? And you don't actually get this information in the movies, but Thanos in Greek mythology is the god of death. And then when you
Mm.
have ology, it is the study of. You put those two words together, thanatology is the study of death, dying, grief, and loss.
Wow.
Wow. I'm big on learning and educating the community and those who are watching or listening. And I bet you most people did not know that. So I thank
Yeah,
you for sharing that.
you're
Uh,
welcome.
I was about to say, when I was reading the bio, I was thinking, or your intro, I was thinking, I swear this is Thanos, but it can't be Thanos. But there you go. Or maybe it's Thanos. Maybe I'm just saying it improperly
Yeah,
to begin
no,
with.
no, you're right. You're right on.
Okay, so Dr. Leigh, as you said, you're doing quite a bit, all in the grief space. I like to start these talks with the simple question: what motivated you to pursue a career in grief space, and I guess more specifically as a grief counselor, specializing in supporting children and families through grief and loss for the past 2 decades?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is a simple question, right? But when you peel back the layers, it becomes quite complicated. And I will do my very best to be succinct about it. So, I, I like to think about my journey as one that was really set kind of for me. I was one of those very rare people, very rare children, that I just knew what I wanted to do when I was very young. I'm talking like 7, 8, 9 years old. And it wasn't as specific. I didn't know the word thanatology. I certainly didn't even know grief counseling, but I was very clear that I wanted to work with hospitalized children to help them. That was as far as I'd gotten in my 9-year-old brain. Fast forward to my first career is as a child life specialist. This is another field that maybe your listeners aren't familiar with, but child life specialists are trained at the intersection of child development and the impact that stressful hospital, healthcare, and medical experiences have. So
Mm.
you find child life specialists typically in a pediatric hospital. That's where I started. So I was 20 years old, fresh, like finishing my bachelor's, not even graduated yet, and working as a child life specialist in one of the biggest children's hospitals on the East Coast. And I had the sickest kids. I was working in a pediatric ICU. And so, in my youth, in my 20 years of life, I was really impacted by
Mm,
so much death every week. And even though my bachelor's degree prepared me at a very foundational level, I felt like I needed more. That's how I deal with challenges. If something challenges me, or if I fail at something, I really want to understand why. What is it that's so hard for me? Why don't I get it? How can I do better? So that's when I went back to school for thanatology. That's the first time that I had heard about it. Um, so, very long story short, once I discovered the field of thanatology and I became a thanatologist, I very quickly left the hospital setting and I started working specifically in pediatric hospice and palliative care. That's pretty much where I've spent the majority of my career, is working with medically fragile children, their families, that include siblings, to help them understand what's happening to them, to
mm,
help them express the emotions associated with it, and to help the family understand, process, and navigate this
mm.
very, very complex experience. Um, so that's the Cliff Notes version of how I ended up in this field.
Can you just quickly inform us what palliative means?
Mhm.
So it's a word I've heard several times, but I couldn't tell you with confidence what that means.
Yeah, so it's another. I've become quite interested in language and where words come from. So palliative, when you look at the root of it, palliate means to cloak. So its original origin is to cover something. Now, in this context, how palliative care came to be is that we're looking at individuals that were suffering. They were in immense pain. And what do we do with that pain is we try to cover it, we try to dampen it. So, a very, very generalized definition of palliative care is helping to live the best quality of life that somebody can live in the midst of a chronic illness or an acute
Mm,
illness that has the potential to end their life. It doesn't mean that a person is dying. And in fact, most of the children that I work with on palliative care are vivacious and very full of life and living their lives and fully in their life, but they're living with a medical complex illness. And with that comes with a very, very complicated intersection. So when you're medically fragile, it's not just your body that's impacted, it's your emotions. So we're looking at like the psychological, the mental, the spiritual, the social, the family. So it's a holistic way of not just treating a child medically, but supporting the entire family through that process.
Yeah. You mentioned a couple minutes ago how you were working at a children's hospice. I that is I I don't know how to what to say. That's probably the most challenging job I could think of, or type of thing to do to think of. Real quickly, I just wanted to know, how did you decompress in that with that as a career? I wouldn't last a day doing that, so I commend you, because someone has strong, able, and composed, has to do that. I'm just curious to know, how did you decompress, and how were you able to survive doing that job?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I floundered a lot. I failed a lot. I became very burnt out. When I first started working, I experienced vicarious traumatization. I really struggled with that balance, with the balance of feeling so fulfilled in a job and in a career, but it was also depleting. So it's
Mm,
taken me, I mean, I've been in this work for 20 years. It's taken me 20 years to really figure out, how do I take care of myself?
Mhm.
And a part of that now is both kind of spreading myself out. So I don't just do clinical work anymore. I used to just do that exclusively. I'm now in academia. I
Mhm.
write. I do, administrative stuff on the board. And then I also have a small practice. So I find that when I can have various aspects of my life that are engaging, but it isn't all clinical, that's helpful. And then also making time in my life for play.
Mhm.
And for me, play is about creativity. So I write music and I sing. I've just started doing pottery. So, like, finding mediums and modalities that I can use my hands
Mhm.
and my body, and generally just being around creative, kind people, I
mm,
find to really fill me up.
Mhm.
And then sometimes I just really just need to lounge on the couch and do a whole lot of nothing. And
Mhm.
so, really kind of giving myself permission that self care looks totally different every day, and that what works one day may not work the next day. And so, I need to, just like with the families I work with, I have to have a very robust toolkit. I have to
Mhm.
be able to be like, okay, like for this specific day, what is going to be the best fit?
Well, I commend you again, and I thank you for that explanation. There's some in our community that are considering going somewhere, or relative to that career path, and I just think that's an important thing to discuss and to be prepared for, because it's got to be incredibly challenging. Todd,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead, Dr. Leigh.
I was going to say it is challenging, and not to diminish the challenging and the sad parts of it, but how I know that I'm in the right field is that even on those most challenging and sad days, I left at the end of the day feeling so honored and
Mm,
Mhm.
so grateful
it's
that
great.
I got to meet that baby or
Mm,
play with that sibling or help a family find a sliver of joy or a
Mhm.
sliver of hope
mm.
in arguably the most painful experience that anyone can go through. And even just
That's
being able to witness and sit there and be with the family is such a huge honor.
That's powerful, Dr. Lee. Thank you very much. I do have another question, but Taj, I feel like you had one, or no?
You
You want me to
kind of
go one
answered
more?
it, but just in
Okay.
general, because it was more of yeah, just what it takes in that way. I know you mentioned that you were someone that if you didn't have the answer, you found the answer in that. But you also seem, because listening to you now, which is, I mean, as TJ said, we commend you in terms of what you're doing in every field that you're doing. You're pretty much everywhere. Good, thank goodness in that way. And we're going to get to the books and the book. I mean, the book and everything as well. But for me, we do have listeners that are thinking about going into certain fields like this in that way. And you seem like now you have everything kind of, and you, as you're saying, like it's still a work in process, but you seem like you're so well put together in terms of like, I like you have the answers for everything, but you've mentioned that basically you didn't, you
Yeah,
found the
no,
answers.
and the one thing, like the more degrees I get, the longer I teach, like the less I know. And it really, like, it's interesting that I started out with this like desire and this need to understand. Um, and even though theoretically, like I can list off all these theories and clinically I work very well with families, I don't know. I don't have the answers.
But you
And I
put in a
feel,
lot of work too. That's the
Mm.
thing too. Just the,
yeah, and there's like, I feel like there's a way in which using that humility and being humble about not knowing,
Mm.
especially when we're talking about answering questions that children have, or how do you tell your child someone is dying? You don't have all the answers and you're never going to. And there is no perfect way to have these conversations. And I think if we can kind of like take some of that pressure off, like there's no such thing as perfection. Like even professors and doctors, like we don't know, we don't know, but we're really good at asking questions, and we're really good at helping the people that we're working with explore and become curious about what we don't know.
With all your experience, decades in this space, in the grief, loss space, what what's one thing, either advice or just one thing you would want to tell the common person, either as a misconception or just anything? What's the one thing you would say? Um, what was the one thing you would want to relay to the commoner who you had a second to talk to about this
Yeah.
topic?
Yeah. I think if I were to look at it from a very global
Mm-hmm.
perspective, the one thing, and I can like go on a tangent on this, so I'll try not to. Um, the one thing that tends to get ingrained in brains is that somehow that grief has stages, and that we start here and we end here, and it's a successive journey. And once we're at this point, which is usually marked by like a time period, we can wash our hands of it. Um, there have been dozens of studies, new theories that have refuted and essentially helped us understand that stages don't exist.
Mm.
They are not linear. There is no such thing as moving from one stage to another. Um, it can help us organize. And that's really where like this interesting thing happens in research versus like taking research and putting that to clinical work. Is oftentimes research is conducted, clinical research, to help the clinician better understand how to help their client or how to help the person with them. But what happens is that the findings of those studies kind of just like immediately go to the general population. And then we grab on to this idea that we can take something inherently complicated, very messy, super contextual, and put it into boxes. Because cognitively, as humans, that's what we do when we are confronted with something we don't understand. It's either this or it's like that. We can move towards it, we can move away from it. But when it falls outside of that, it like literally fritzes our brains. Um, so that's a very long way of saying, if we can start to pivot, maybe reframe and shift the way that we think about grief is not just an emotion, although we tend to talk about it just as an emotion. It is a full human experience. Our brain changes, our gut changes, our emotions change, the way
Mhm.
that we relate to the world around us changes, the way that we relate to ourselves changes. So it almost becomes a part of who you are that you've never met before. So if you imagine like you're, 22 years old and you've just experienced your first significant loss, you've spent 22 years of your life building yourself to be what it is now. And now this other part has shown up with a suitcase being like, I'm moving in. And you're like, I don't know you. I don't know who you are or what you do or how you feel in my body. And so, if we can start to understand grief as a part of us and become curious about it and understand how it shows up, when it shows up, what it needs, what it requires of us, that can help us start to shift away from this idea of like grief as pathology or it's been 13 months. Why are you still missing them? So like I said, I can go on a tangent on this. So
Yeah,
I
no,
hope
I love
that
that.
that made sense.
It made a lot of sense. So I appreciate that answer. I agree with you. I think a lot of people, I could say, I mean, my grief journey was a little different, but I think a lot of people, they want to gravitate to things like steps, and there's like as if there's a playbook on how to maneuver through it. If you do X, ABC, then you'll be okay, kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
that's not how it really works at all. So I appreciate you saying it in the way you did, because I completely agree. We've talked about this many times. There could be weeks where we're doing well, and then something just throws you back into feeling,
Mhm.
one of those kind of ways that are in those stages. So I appreciate
Mhm.
the answer. Now, obviously, with your grief counseling, this is a two-part question. How can someone connect with you, so that you can work with them in their healing journey or in the process? And what can someone expect in working with you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is to go to my website. You can also DM me on Instagram, but I'll send you to my website. So go to my website and fill out. There's like a little contact me form, and that just bumps right to my email address, and then we can talk a little bit about maybe working together and you know what to expect. It's actually like it's I have to think about that because it's different for everybody. I can say logistically, like practically speaking, I work almost exclusively virtually. I do have an in-person office here in Santa Fe, but to be honest, like most of the people I work with are scattered throughout the country. I do have a few people I work with in other countries as well. Because the nature of my specialization is so specific. I certainly specialize in the loss of a child, but I also have subspecialties in pregnancy loss, termination for medical reasons, stillbirth, and miscarriage. So, people who have experienced those kind of losses tend to find me, and they're usually not in Santa Fe.
Hmm.
So, it is over Zoom. And sessions are kind of like the traditional, 50 minutes. Um, and it really depends on what a person is needing, what they're coming to me for, and if they're open to being creative and exploring through art materials. What I'll do is I'll give my clients like an art list of picking up certain materials so that they have them physically in front of them, and then I will facilitate an activity or a processing. And I've actually found it to be quite helpful using. You would think this Zoom or virtual would be
Hmm.
a challenge, but I haven't experienced any challenges when people are ready and interested in exploring that.
Yeah, I can make the argument it's less. Oh, it's obviously less intimidating because a lot of times you're doing it from the comfort of your room or your home, and it's because that's something that I've always been worried about with therapy is the intimidation factor, the fear. So I think it's a beautiful thing. And one thing I want to highlight is your website address in case you're listening. You don't know what it is, and that is KorieLeighPhD.com. It is KorieLeighPhD.com. LeighPhD.com. I love that rundown, and I appreciate the information. Again, our goal here for the Power of Love show is just to spread information on grief, and to help hopefully people connect with people that they need or hear something they desperately needed to hear. So I thank you for sharing your services publicly with us.
Yeah, thank you.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about is your book. What was, I love it. The smile was awesome. So what does grief feel like? First of all, what was the inspiration behind the book? Why did you want to write a book? And who would you say is the intended audience for the book?
Yeah, so this is definitely a multi-year process. I first started thinking about writing a book when I was working in the pediatric hospice. It really came out of my clinical work. So I do a lot of grief work with children, with siblings. And at the time, there were no books specific about grief. So that's one thing to just keep in mind. There are a lot of books now, and I'll talk a little bit about how mine is different. But at the time, there really were no books on grief specifically. Lots of books on death, lots of books on talking about death, and books where characters die. So what I was finding is that in my sessions, I ask the same questions. I would do the same activities with different siblings, and they were pretty simple. Sometimes the questions would be as simple as, if your grief were a color, what color would it be?
Mhm.
And we would spend an entire session on that one question. And so over the years, as books came out, I was just I really wasn't satisfied with them. In my background, coming from child development, I am very aware of the language, the words, the reading level of the books that I'm using. And also, as a child life specialist, knowing the importance of concrete, direct, honest, accurate information. Like if those were like a checklist, maybe there was one book, and of that one book, I would tape pages together because certain things were not appropriate. So eventually, it was during COVID. It was August of 2020, and I was sitting in my kitchen table, and a download came. I was like, okay, the book's ready. And in one sitting, I wrote the book. And this is very rare. I did go through many rounds of editing, but the majority of the text is what I wrote at the kitchen table that day. It was ready. It was ready to come out. It was ready to be there. So the book is written for younger children. It's really written for the pre-operational child, so like 3 to 7. However, I have had people come and tell me, I use this with my spousal loss group. We had an 83-year-old. Someone said an 83-year-old in the group read this book, was able to use the questions in it, and even identify with the characters in it as he was processing the loss of his wife. So one of, I think, the most powerful aspects of not just this book, but children's literature in general, is that we take really complicated topics and we distill them. We make them palatable. We make them easy to digest and understand. The words are not too big. The sentences are short, but they're powerful. And so I have used this book with a 3-year-old. So I like to say it's from 3 to 83. And it's a psychotherapeutic book. And what that means is that it isn't a storybook insofar that you just give it to a child and say, good luck, have fun reading this. It's meant to be read with a child. It's meant for an adult to read it with a child, to ask questions that are embedded throughout the pages. So that example of, if your grief were a color, what color would it be? That's a question in the book. And the book opens up right away. The very first page is, you can see a child sitting in a chair, and it says, someone I love died. So right away, we're using the words dead, die, death. Right away, we're setting the stage. And the first question in the book is, did someone that you love die too? What was their name? So it helps to open that conversation, because oftentimes parents would come to me and say, I don't even know how to start the conversation, or what do I say, or what
Yeah,
questions do I ask? This book provides it for you. And then
that's
in the
great.
back of the book, there is a parent and a caregiver guide that provides a little bit more information on just developmentally appropriate responses, what to look for behaviorally, what's kind of typical behavior when like a 3-year-old is grieving or a 7-year-old is grieving, and things like that.
What Does Grief Feel Like? The book, the debut book by Dr. Korie Leigh, is available on Amazon, bookshop.com, Target, Barnes and Noble, and I was going to say my favorite, but I'm getting back to the hard physical copies. But yeah, I'll still say my favorite. And of course, Kindle. I love Kindle. Now, Taj has a question for you, Dr. Leigh, before I go to my second question. And Taj, go ahead and ask that.
I know what you're going to say on my question.
but you don't
I
feel
don't
like
think
this
it's
is.
appropriate.
I
I've
think you're
always
right,
asked,
Taj.
whenever
I,
someone creates a grief book or book on grief, my go-to question is always, is it going to be on Audible?
but maybe
But
this one's not really for Audible,
yeah,
right?
or it's going to
Yeah.
be, is there an audio version of it? But I wasn't going to ask that question for this because I see the importance of, especially talking, this book's about
Yeah.
someone being there with the child and
Yeah.
kind of being there talking with them. And so I wasn't going to ask that question,
I,
believe it or not, because I ask it on everyone. But
he
I was
does,
like,
but
I understand this one. Like, I
no,
understand
I
why it
love it.
wouldn't be in that way. And I love how, like, first of all, the cover is amazing, but I also love when you said you got straight to the point of death,
Yeah.
dying, grief, like that, the things that would be hard for a parent or a person to bring up to a child, it's there right away.
Yeah.
And so this is really, I wish my 21-year-old self would have read this book, when my
Mhm.
mom passed, in that way, just in that way, because I needed something simplified
Well,
more
doc,
so
doc,
in that way than something more complicated, because you're in that mindset that it's overwhelming as it is. So you're right. The
Yes.
children books are amazing for that aspect of it.
Yes. And
Simplified,
just
no big words. No.
yeah.
and to kind of take it a step further in terms of just, what is important for general people to understand is that when we're grieving, our brains are grieving, particularly the front part, the prefrontal cortex, which really helps us with executive functioning. So memory, concentration, being able to multitask, recall, do higher functions. So that it's almost like that part of the brain is dampened. So our ability to read a whole page of text, not so much.
Mm,
That's one of the challenges. There are beautiful books out there for adults on grief, but they're 250 pages.
yeah.
Um, if you are in fresh, raw, early grief the first year, it's really, really hard. And for most people, it's impossible to sit down and be able to read and recall and remember and then like synthesize that information.
That's
So
great.
you're absolutely right. That's why children's books and even kind of like just smaller textbooks are what I recommend for the people that I work with.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you for that. It's very important, and I think that's a nugget that I'll always have now. So I appreciate that. And now you have a second book that is scheduled for release this winter. What details can you share with our community about this upcoming project?
Yeah, so I have a small update. It's not going to be out this winter. I
Oh,
know. My publisher let me know for sure. It's going to be out in the fall. So
okay,
we still have a little bit of time to go. It's written,
okay,
it's gone through like 7 rounds of editing. I'm super excited for it. It's just in the traditional publishing. So I have a publisher. I didn't self-publish, hybrid publish. It moves really slow.
yeah,
But the quality is
yeah,
is
yeah.
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
So I am fully prepared to see a beautiful book in September or October.
Great.
So this book
Mm-hmm.
was also written right after I wrote What Does Grief Feel Like? But it started out as a poem. It started out as like a written poem that was essentially my recollection of asking teenagers and young adults that question, which is essentially, if your grief were blank, what would it be? My grief is like blank. So very open-ended. And it was just like a compilation of all of that. I sent that to my publisher and they said, we love this idea, but we can't publish a poem. I was like, okay, I'll write a whole book. So essentially I took each stanza, and each stanza has become its own chapter. And it's really on navigating, understanding, expressing, and moving through grief as a teenager. And if there are few books for children on grief, there are even fewer
Yeah.
for teenagers that are well written, appropriate, accurate, and that a teen's going to actually want to like open up or use. That's the other thing. So the book is also, it's written with very simple language, but it is also paired. So each chapter, each section is paired with an activity. So if that teen wanted to, they could do it on their own, but it could also be done like with a friend or counselors and teachers and, even after school activity folks can take this book and just use the curriculum that's within it. So all of the activities to facilitate a 3-week, a 6-week, an 8-week, a 12-week grief group for teens.
It's great. Okay. And again, to learn more information, I know on your Instagram, I'm sure once the book is out, you will be letting us know via
Yes.
Instagram.
Yeah.
So for everyone out there, you can follow Dr. Korie Leigh on Instagram. Her handle is at DrKorie And I also assume it will be on your website, which we mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And then I have another comment I want to post up. This is from April, who says, talking about your first book,
Mhm.
What Does Grief Feel Like? I'm really interested in this book. My son is 7, and lately he's been having such a difficult time with the loss of his baby brother. He passed 3 years ago, and he's still having a hard time understanding. And the majority of the time, I don't know how to explain it to him in a way he does understand. So I guess my first question to you would be, is there any thoughts you have back to April? And then what is your opinion? Would your book be something that would be good for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And April, thank you so much for asking this question. And my heart goes out to you for the loss of your baby and your grief. The fact that your son is 7 now, but was 3 years younger when the loss happened, is something I talk about in the back of this book as well. So when children are pre-operational, when they're in this magical thinking stage, it is really, really hard for them to understand the finality and the irreversibility of death. Using very concrete words, such as when somebody dies, it means that their body stops working forever. They don't eat, they don't play, they don't sleep. When we die forever. It can sound harsh, but it is very true. And it is simple and concrete when we start with just the basics. The other thing that can be really hard for younger kids, especially if there is any kind of belief in heaven or an afterlife, it can get a little confusing to be like, well, wait a minute, like if brother has died and he's in heaven, like why can't I go visit him in heaven? Right. So, or there was a family who said, we lost your sister. And then the 4-year-old was seen like looking under the table. Well, if we lost her, we should find her. Right. So using euphemisms can really muddy the water for younger kids. So that would be my first suggestion, is to just stick to the basics and the very concrete, simple language. However, what can happen around the age of 7 is kids exit out of their pre-operational stage and they enter into something called concrete operations. So 7 years old, 7.5, 8, it kind of depends on the child, is really where if a loss has happened years before, they're going to be revisiting that loss with a new understanding. So I've worked with some children that around 3 or 4, their sibling died, but it wasn't until 7, 8, 9 that, in their words, it clicked. I understood, oh, he's never coming back. When you die, it means you die forever. Because the way that they're understanding abstract ideas is changing and evolving. So oftentimes you'll get, children of this age range going back and revisiting and asking the same questions again, or being like, well, wait a minute, like you said that they died by this, but like, what does that mean? So they're asking more complicated questions. And in a lot of ways, they're re-grieving. So maybe you'll see behavioral regression. Maybe you'll see them becoming more clingy or fearful. And it is all developmentally normal. And it is normal to see some behavioral regressions. But what a book like mine can do is it can help to normalize. It can help to give us space, because oftentimes in families, we want this to be a one-time conversation. But it unfortunately isn't. And for the parent that is also grieving, that can be really, really hard. So if you have another person like an auntie, or even someone in the family that can have these conversations, that can read this book, it can be a really, really healing place. So I definitely recommend that. I think my book would be very, very helpful.
Thank you so much for that response, Dr. Korie. And April, we are sending you all the love possible. All the love possible. Okay, so Dr. Korie, the next thing I wanted to ask you about was how you are serving on the board of directors for Heroes Path Paliative. Did I say that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Can you share some insights about the organization and how can we learn more about it and contribute to its mission?
Yeah, thank you so much. So, Heroes Path Palliative is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are the only pediatric palliative care organization in the state of New Mexico. So in this state, there are over 50,000 medically complex children, so children that are living with medical complexities. And up until our organization formed in 2019, there was really no psychosocial support for these families. Heroes Path was formed by 3 bereaved parents whose child died in the state of New Mexico without receiving palliative care. So these families know what they could have received if they lived in another state, but because they were here and there was just inadequate services, they didn't have that. So they banded together and created Heroes Path. And essentially the role that I have is I provide the psychosocial services. So I provide the supportive counseling. We do outings, and we have a few different kind of activity groups that run when the weather is better, because it's really cold and snowy here right now. But in the nicer months, we have a lot of outdoor activities where we bring children into nature, into the environment, and we integrate different arts-based activities with them. And then I also provide home-based care. So I have some families that I'll drive to their home and I'll do sessions at their home because of, parenting a child who has a G-tube and a trach and is in a wheelchair and is vented. Like, you can't get in the car and drive an hour, to see me. So I'll get in a car and drive an hour to see you. So that's what I do on the board. And then I do a lot of grant writing. We are in the process of trying to raise capital to build a house that would essentially be a respite house and a hospice house for the children of New Mexico here.
So cool. What's the best way for people to learn more about Heroes Path Palliative? Is it
the website?
Your website, going there first?
So Heroes Path has its own website. I believe it's just heroespathpalliative.org.
Okay, great. Okay. And then we talked about your website. That's probably the best place to learn more about you and to see what projects you have not only done, but that's coming up for the future projects. We mentioned briefly your Instagram, but for a lot of people now like to just follow people on Instagram and stay abreast that way. Again, Dr. Leigh's Instagram handle is Dr. Korie Leigh. That is DrKorieLeigh. Is there anything else we missed, Dr. Korie, before we turn it over to you for your final words? Anything you want to say off topic, on topic, anything?
You know, this work is just, it's my life's work. I really love what I do, and I want to support children and families however I can. I feel so honored and blessed that I can write and publish these books now, and I actually have 4 more that are in the process of publication. The next children's book that's coming out, just if anyone is interested, it has nothing to do with grief. It is actually a book on a very common learning disability. So the publisher that I publish with is doing a whole series on the most common childhood learning disabilities, and I'm writing a book on one of them. So if you follow me on Instagram, I'll be making posts about that as well.
Very good. Very good. Okay, I'm just going to highlight some comments just so you can see all the love you're getting. And everybody is thanking you for sharing your information and knowledge. So thank you so much, Dr. Leigh. I don't know if I gave you your moment, but because I kind of muffled the question by asking, is there anything else you want to say? So now I guess I should say, is there any other thing you want to talk about? Any favorite Netflix show, favorite cooking recipe, or anything of those natures? Otherwise, you don't have to, but I just want to make sure I give you your moment to say whatever you want to say.
Yeah, thank you. So just like two very quick things. The first is, you know, grief is one of those human experiences that touches all of us. And so often in this Western culture, we are grieving together alone. We live in our houses that are feet apart from other houses. We get in our cars to go drive to the drive-through. Sometimes people go an entire day without speaking to another human being. And when we live in these isolated communities, it makes the grieving process that much more hard, that much more stuck. And if there's one thing that I can suggest or recommend, is to find your people, find your grief space, find whether that's virtually or in person, whether it's a death cafe, which happen oftentimes in a lot of communities. Here in Santa Fe, we have grief cafes. We also have a very vibrant art community. And so there's, I'm collaborating with an artist community here to create more community spaces for collective grief. That's actually what I'm going to be conducting my next study on, is the intersection of the way that ritual and art and community all come together to support the grief that we're all walking around with. Even not just death losses, but when we think of all of the cumulative losses, the secondary losses, we're all grieving. And if we can just make a little bit of space to normalize it and to talk about it, imagine like what a more vibrant community we would all be a part of. So that's my grief tidbit. And it's really cold here in Santa Fe. It's very snowy. And so I've been using my Instapot like every day. I've been making like soups. So I put together this kale potato like stew soup thing. It's so good. I'm eating that every day.
I love it. I love it. Well, Taj, was there anything before that you want to share before I close out the show, my friend?
No, I mean, I love this episode, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing not only your story, but just not only the books that are, you know, the new one that's coming and the other ones that are on the way as well. It's just, you have a gift of explaining that's very interesting to me, because you said a lot of things that clicked to me in a way that it was, I don't want to say dumbing down, because that sounds, I don't want to insult the audience, but that's what it did. Like, you gave it a Cliff Note version that kind of in a way made it really, and I know
But it was still
that's
very strong and
my vibe.
direct.
Yeah, I'm a
Yeah.
Cliff Note person. Like that's my vibe. So as you
Yeah.
said with the children books and stuff like that, when my mom passed, there wasn't really grief books, and so Who Moved My Cheese was my book in that way, and that was a and that's I translated in my brain what that meant in the grieving space, just about something moving and changing and all of that. So it you spoke to me. I just want you to know that, and thank you so much for coming on. That's I said in a long-winded way, but that's what I meant.
Thank you. I'm so glad that it resonated. And I think maybe like number 3 really quickly is we overcomplicate things so much. Like that's just what we do as humans. That's what our brain does. I tend to operate from the perspective of like saying less is more. Because when we say less, we give the people that we're talking to more space. And especially in the grief space, there is nothing that I can say or do or provide that is going to relieve your suffering. There's nothing I can do to make your grief better. The only thing I can do is witness. I can walk alongside. I can companion. And we together can give grief the space to be expressed how it needs so that there's more room within you to be able to live your life as fully as you can.
Well, again, I'm going to read a couple. Korie says, "Thank you, Dr. Leigh, for a wonderful show and the difference you are making for so many." April says, "I love this episode. It was very informative. Thank you, Dr. Leigh, for your words. It's definitely something that I'm going to look into even for myself." And there's so many other comments, but I just want to tell you, Dr. Leigh, I want to thank you for a wonderful, informative episode that has not only made a difference for me and my brother and our foundation, but for the whole community who's watching or listening today, as well as years into the future. I commend you for being decades in this space. It's a challenging space, but someone like you is who's needed to do it. So just wanted to, on a personal kind of way, just thank you for being that person, that truly that hero. So for everyone else out there, again, I'm going to put up the website so you can learn more of what Dr. Korie Leigh is up to. It's KorieLeighPhD.com. Instagram users, you can go to Dr. Korie Leigh. Trying to think if I have any others. That is it. So yeah, I think I hit everything. But again, Dr. Leigh, thank you, thank you, thank you. You are always welcome back, whether it's the next book, the book after. You are always welcome back. And again, thank you for all the information you gave us.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And thank you for the work that you're doing and for creating this space and bringing so many people together. It's so needed. We need more spaces like this. And the very, very, very last thing.
Yes.
So the university that I'm a professor at is Marian University. It is based in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and we offer a fully online asynchronous Master of Science in Thanatology, and we also offer a fully online asynchronous certificate. So if you already have your bachelor's and you're not sure you want to get a master's, or you already have a master's and you don't want to get another one, we offer a certificate program as well. And everything is online. It's all asynchronous. We have like the best faculty. Our classes are engaging, 7-week semesters, rolling admissions, the whole thing.
Okay. And how can they learn more about that? What was there a website, or should they DM you, or what?
Yeah, there is a website. I can drop the link. I can put a link in my bio in my Instagram for the Marian program.
Yeah, that would be great if you could for a short amount of time. That way, if someone's like, "Oh, I want to learn," that way they could find it.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, that is it. That is the end of our show. This was a special show. Thank you again, Dr. Leigh. Taj, as always, thanks, man. And to everyone who's watching, listening, we thank you all for being part of this community. We love you all. We want to just share some love and light to each and every one of you who may be going through challenging times. And that is it. We will see you guys next Wednesday at 1 p.m. for another episode of the Power of Love Show. Adios, everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Bye.